Hey, if you think that we've been invaded by bees, you're wrong. We haven't. But can you guess what this next episode is about? Yes, honeybees. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Tiny Little Victories. I'm your host, Jennifer Kite-Powell, and I am so thrilled to share this episode with you today. We are going to be talking about the European honeybee, Apis mellifera. Yes, the honeybee. And before we get into some really fun facts about honeybees, I first just want to say that my guest today, I met about 6 months ago at a beekeeping meeting, yes, in Texas, in Dallas, Texas. And I was so fascinated by his approach to bees, how he thinks about bees, and he actually became my bee mentor, helping me when I started beekeeping here in Dallas. Now, if I back up about, a long time ago, when I was a young girl, my sister and I used to help my grandfather with his bees in Georgia. And he used to take us out into the farm and we would pull the frames out, scrape the honey off, and we would learn so much about bees. I remember being completely fascinated. And now, as a new beekeeper, a backyard beekeeper, I am doing it on my own without my grandfather, but it does make me feel a little closer to him and bring those memories back. So that's a nice feeling. But also the satisfaction of watching a hive work, watching how they work together, and learning about how to, as Pat McKannan says, think like a bee. So on that note, I'm going to talk to you about a few facts about bees before we jump into this episode with Pat. And there has been some research out there from Arizona State University, one of my favorite universities, I have to tell you, just by the way there are changing the way people learn through augmented reality, virtual reality. That was definitely a tangent. Anyway, we'll come back to that on another episode. But some scientists there have discovered that older honeybees can reverse brain aging when they take on nest responsibilities that are handled by younger bees. Now, when a bee is born, it instantly goes to work. It comes out and it cleans its cell, and it does that and nurses the next bees until it moves on to its other job. So I guess these scientists are saying that, hey, older honeybees that are maybe doing the foraging, because it's really hard work out there flying around looking for pollen, can take on nesting responsibilities and reversing the aging. I wonder if that could be applied to humans. Think about that for a minute. Some people also say that the buzzing sound of bees helps clear their minds. I, for one, am in that camp totally. And some people say that beekeeping helps reduce stress and anxiety. And I can fully tell you, once I got over the anxiety of being stung, that there's nothing more satisfying than opening up a hive and hearing that buzzing sound and seeing all those girls working really hard to protect their home. Let's sit down and have a teeny tiny science class. So almost 90% of plants and 75% of global crops depend on animal population. So 1 out of every 3 mouthfuls of our food depends on pollinators, such as bees. Now, honeybees are not the only pollinators out there. Before you smash a yellow jacket, which I know those stings are terrible, so people want to smash them, those guys are actually really prolific pollinators. So you have to think about the whole animal cycle. It's not just the tiny little honeybee. It's also the big, chunky bumblebee, and yellow jackets. Crops actually depend on pollination are 5 times more valuable than those that don't. So any fruit trees, think about fruit trees. If we didn't have pollinators like bees, we would not have any fruit. Another really great fact about bees is social bees, such as honeybees and bumblebees, they live in hives or nests either above or below the ground. And while most solitary bees nest in the ground. So bees can be found just about everywhere. And these include marshes, your shingles in your house, sand dunes, soft cliffs, empty trees, wetlands, chalk grasslands, everywhere. So even, post-industrial land. So sometimes I know my neighbor, she keeps bees, but she keeps them in a hollowed out tree trunk. So she has a water source. Sometimes she feeds them. And I love walking by her house to hear the buzzing sound of bees. They're everywhere. I think another interesting fact, let's see here. Oh yes, let's talk about bringing a bee back to life. If you find a bee which appears to be struggling, it could be that he's just resting, particularly if it's like early in the spring, could be the queen bee who's been out on a mating run. If you think the bee is struggling, the best thing to do is just push it on to a bee-friendly flower. I have a water fountain for my bees to drink out of, and sometimes they fall in, and if I see them, I pick them up and put them on a little rock, and then they dry their wings and they fly away. So I think that is something, if you see a bee struggling, you can also mix a 50-50 white sugar water to give the bumblebee just like a jolt of energy. Just sort of spritz it a little bit, drop or two of water. It'll like soak it up, clean off its wings, and fly away. Think of it as like a Gatorade for bees. And I'm going to not read all of these, but I have to say this. Anybody, including you, can help out a bee. If you don't have a garden, or even if you have a balcony, you can put pollinator-friendly plants in your windowsill or in a little pot on your balcony, because that helps bees find food. Any little thing that has pollination in it will be good food for them through the year. So if you don't have a house with a garden, you don't worry. You can still help the bees by planting flowers that have pollinators. So that's things like marigolds, those little marigold flowers, foxgloves, primrose, any native wildflowers, anything like that you can put in a pot on your balcony or in your yard will definitely help bees. Okay, now on that note, I am going to stop and pause and bring you my favorite beekeeper, Pat McKannan. Hey everybody, you're listening to Tiny Little Victories with your host, Jennifer Kite-Powell, and I'm sitting here on a very rainy day in Dallas, Texas, with a man who has a big white cowboy hat on with bee pins around the top of it. Welcome, Pat McKannan.
Pat McKannan from Texas.
I love that. Don't you love that? People from Texas are like, hi, I'm from Texas. Doesn't matter where you go. I think Matthew McConaughey said something funny that when he was traveling the world, when he first became a celebrity, he was like, hey, I'm from Texas. And people were like, yeah, we know. And he said, but I got a tattoo of Texas. And everyone was showing their tattoos of Texas. So it's just like a Texas thing, I guess, to be like, I'm from Texas and this is my tattoo.
I'm terrified of tattoos.
Do you have a tattoo?
No.
You don't have a tattoo?
My wife has 7 or 8 of them.
Your wife has tattoos?
But I don't have any tattoos. I'm terrified.
What? I know. I want a tattoo really badly, but I can't think of what I would want to have. Well, maybe a bee for you.
When I worked the state fair for the Texas Bee Association, I have a bad habit of asking people that walk by the booth to explain their
tattoos,
their ink to me, because
I love that.
If you got a tattoo, you better have a story to go with.
This is true.
So
I agree with this. Okay, so you guys, I have Pat McKannan here in the studios in Dallas, and he is a retired twice from your job. And right now he is an advocate for keeping bees. He's a beekeeper. Can we call you a backyard beekeeper?
Yes, urban beekeeper.
Urban beekeeper.
The term everybody's migrating to is urban beekeeper.
I love that.
Because it covers a lot of ground.
I like that. And this episode is called Apis mellifera because Pat became my mentor when I decided to get bees. So this whole episode is going to be about the honeybee. So buckle up for honeybee talk. So you were just at the State Fair of Texas, which is this massive thing.
Yes. And the Texas Bee Association has a demonstration booth there, information booth where you can come by and look at the honey, get the brochures about it, find a club that's in your area and learn to keep bees.
To promote keeping bees.
Keeping bees.
Now, they don't have bees there, right? Because it'd be funny.
Actually, they do have a demonstration hive there.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, how do you get a demonstration hive?
The guy that helped set the booth up, and he's been doing it for years, John Talbot.
Okay. You mentioned him. He was the one that has the clover leaf honey, right?
He has I forget what his apiary is.
Yeah.
That's on his honey. But yes, he has a lot of hives.
Okay.
Him and his son work the hives. They're down, the two of them run it. But every 2 or 3 days, he has a couple of those demonstration hives, and he changes them out every 2 or 3 days.
What does a demonstration hive look like?
It kind of looks a little bit like a pyramid, and the bottom of it is a lot of bees, and then there's a queen excluder, and then there's 2 or 3 frames that up in a glass partition.
That's cool.
Where you can show the kids the queen.
And the inside of how a hive works.
Mm-hmm. Basically, you can...
That's really cool.
Not 100% of the things you can see in the hive, but you can see the worker bees, you can see the queen, if there's any drones, you can see them.
And do the kids like it, or do the grown-ups love it, or what?
The kids love it. And I have a story about the state fair.
Tell me.
I thought I was pretty smart about bees.
Yeah.
But the last Wednesday, the 18th, I was working the booth, and right before the building that we're in started to close, there was this little, and I don't know, 7, 8, 9-year-old little girl walked up there, and there's 10 or 12 people standing around, and the people were asking me questions, and I was answering them. All of a sudden, this little girl, she starts answering the questions.
About the bees,
the sex of the bees, what each worker does, how many jobs they have. And she took over answering all of those people's questions, and she never missed a lick. I never had to correct her or nothing.
Really?
I met a real beekeeper.
Did you get a chance to talk to her? Like where she just...
She came up there, she took over answering questions, and when the people kind of started drifting off, she went back and walked across the hallway where her parents were standing watching her, and about a minute after everybody left, she walked back up the booth and she said, "Thank you for letting me talk about bees."
Are you kidding me? She's like the bee whisperer.
She was good.
I mean, where is she getting that from? Just like a book, or?
I never asked her name. I never asked her about her
love
parents.
This. Yeah.
I missed all of that. And my buddies have asked me, "So what do you know about her?" I said, "All I know is I met somebody. She can't be keeping bees because she's too little."
Right. I mean, how are you going to lift those frames? They're so heavy when they're full of bees.
That box and the frames up and everything. But she knew about bees.
I love that.
I'm just going to say a medium guess, 8 years old.
I love it. I mean, how does that happen? You just love bees and you want to absorb everything about a bee.
Somebody in her family, somebody in her neighborhood.
I love that you say this because I think one of the things that you've taught me, and one of the things I notice now when I'm obviously parroting you when I talk to people, is like how little people actually know about a honeybee. First of all, they think they're going to sting you all the time. Second of all, they think they're boys. They think they're boy bees. Yeah. Third of all, they think the queen runs the hive. And they have no concept at all about the importance of bees to our pollination and our food. And that's one of the biggest things I've learned. So, and all of your time keeping bees, how many hives do you have?
5.
You have 5 hives. And
in my backyard.
And how did you learn to look after bees?
I joined 2 bee clubs. And for 2 years, I went to the meetings in the bee club. And then I also took the club's lessons. Both of the clubs, I signed up for their lessons and everything.
That's
spent
smart.
2 years before I spent any money on any of the woodenware.
2 years? Oh, I took one class from Christy. Christy is like a bee celebrity. Bee whisperer.
She's good.
Yeah.
No doubt about that.
And I got a box. And was like, I'm doing bees. And I did it with my grandfather when I was little, probably like this little girl. But it is an investment. Like you have to invest a couple $100, if more, not more, into getting the bees and the box of bees.
If you're talking basic, just one hive box with the woodenware and the bees, you're talking 200. And right now, a small nucleus hive is $260. And then you got another 200 in woodenware. So you're at $500
right there. Quick. And just for everybody to know, we're going to talk a little bit about this, but you have to go and buy bees if you don't have them. Right. You buy a nucleus, which they call nukes, and it will have all your honeybees and a queen inside of it. Is that right?
A mated queen.
A mated queen. So let's tell this great story because first of all, Apis mellifera is the name for the Italian honeybee. Is that right?
The European.
The European honeybee.
They break it down to the European honeybee, and the Apis scutellata is the African honeybee.
Okay. So everybody here keeping bees probably has all Apis mellifera bees.
99.9% of them. Now, there will be some that came up from South America.
Yeah.
The scutellata has come in and crossbred.
Okay, and does that make
genetics are here in Texas. There's no doubt.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Does that change the bee itself then? Because
it can change their temperament to make them whether there's calm bees
or aggressive bees
or hot bees.
Because I feel like my bees, and you've been in my hive a couple of times, are really calm.
You got good bees.
I got good bees, right?
There's no doubt. I don't.
Those are Christy's bees.
But you got bees from Christy, and she has good bees. And even if they were to turn hot on you, she could get you a queen or something.
But why is that? Why does Christy have an ability to like produce like 10s and 20s and 30,000 of bees for people?
Because one of the money-making things about being a beekeeper is selling bees.
See, that was a surprise to me.
And she has taught herself how to
sell bees.
Well, how to produce bees so she has an excess where she can sell them from time to time. It didn't come to her overnight.
No, I can imagine.
She's
really
worked
hard.
real hard to learn what she's learned.
We'll have to get her on the show and you to come back. She is very, very interesting. I took classes with her. She actually takes you out into the field. Yeah. So you're looking at live hives. You're like lifting things up. Okay, so one of the first things I did when I met you was you gave me a little card that I have right here. It's a little card that's been covered in plastic, and it says bee math. Mm-hmm. This was the hardest thing for me to understand, was bee math. So what do we need to understand about bees that makes this so important, just in general?
You need to know bee math so you can do what you need to do in the hive.
Yeah.
You have to know when you look in the hive what you're looking at. First off, you're looking at nothing but female bees, because the queen and all the workers are female.
That's another myth checkbox that people think they're all fellas.
And then the hive produces a certain number of drones, mostly in the spring and early summer, because the hive wants to keep itself alive.
Yeah.
So it produces drones for other queens to mate with, and if the hive wants to make another hive, split or swarm, you have to produce queens and you have to produce drones. So another hive has to produce drones for your hive, because it's not good genetics
to mix them together. Yeah.
And I read a book, and I don't know how accurate it is, that when a virgin queen flies out of a hive, she'll come out of the front door on the landing board and she'll fly to the left. And supposedly all the drones that come out of that hive know that she went left and they go right.
How the heck is that?
I don't know. I don't even know if it's true.
But it could be true.
But it makes sense.
Yeah. So she goes left, the bees go right to come around and meet and mate in the middle.
Well, the drones will take off and they'll fly to something that's called a drone congregation area. And nobody really can locate one of those. The scientists can't find them real easily. They know they exist.
Yeah.
And they're playing around how to find them. But the drones will go to this area, and the virgin queens will fly around, and they will go to a drone congregation area and mate with the drones that are flying around there.
That's incredible to me to know, like somewhere in the airspace, right? There's
approximately 90 foot above the ground.
That's not even that far away.
Yeah. It's 90 foot up. Now, it might be 2 miles from the hive.
And also, it could be 2 miles from the hive. So she will go in one direction and they will follow her scent.
Theoretically, they want us to believe, and it might be true, that she will go to one drone congregation area where her offspring are not there.
Right. So, of course, this makes sense. Yeah. Okay, so the drones in my hive, then, and if I had a virgin queen, she's not going to mate with those dudes. She
should not.
Yeah.
Now how accurate all of this information is,
I think this would make sense, because you can't imagine. So she's going to look for other male drones that are out there. Yeah. Somewhere flying around. Does this happen a certain time of the year, or is
mostly in the spring? It can happen at any time.
Birds and the bees.
As a matter of fact, people are talking right now. If you had a hive that was in trouble and you let it make a virgin queen right now, are there enough drones out there right now in October?
Probably not.
For them for the virgin queens to mate with. And it's down here in the south, it may be working fine.
Yeah, but not up north.
But up north, it would, I'm sure there's no drones flying around. But it's all geographic.
But that's also quite interesting to me, because we're having a lot of climate change going on, right? Like it's warmer in some places, and
definitely going to change things.
And I wonder how that's going to affect, because I'm just learning from you and learning every day in the hive. But it's amazing to me because it got really hot here in Texas over the summer, and I was like, oh my God, you call them spicy. Yes. And so for everybody out there listening, Pat has told me, like, there's a period of time in the summer where there's no food because there's no flowers. A dearth, they call it. And so if you guys are out by your pool and you're drinking a Coca-Cola and you're mad because there's a bee swarming around, remember, that bee's starving. So let him have the sugar out of your Coca-Cola. That's the lesson to that story.
Just be real careful. It's not in there
when you sip it, right. And so now that the weather's cooled off here and the rain has come, I feel like I was watching them the other day, and they doing these bee flights out the back. It's been so beautiful.
And have you been standing there right at daylight, give or take a little bit?
Yes.
And you watch them zoom out. They don't
fast.
They go out so fast.
I love,
because they found the resource of stuff that they need.
I saw you that it had been so dry here that you checked your honey supers where you keep the honey, and there was nothing. And then we had this rain, and then 2 weeks later, how many pounds of honey did you take out of there?
74.
74 pounds, you guys, after the rain.
And that came out of basically 3 hives.
Only 3 hives.
Yeah. It was, in my backyard, I have taken as much as 100 pounds off of one hive in a good year.
Oh my God, really?
Mm-hmm. Don't happen very often.
I don't think I have any honey in my hive except in the bottom frames where they were building that honey bridge. Yeah. So I've decided to let my bees use all the honey to winter over to make a stronger hive for spring.
I highly recommend that. I have no problem with that.
Good. That's check.
That's just a good management project, unless you know there is an excess.
Yeah. I mean, you checked my hive last and you said they were happy.
Yeah. And see, when you come out of that hot, dry spell, the reason your bees will calm back down is they're not desperate.
Yeah.
They got pollen.
Sugar water.
Sugar water, pollen. They got resources. The resources are out there right now. Now, come another 3 weeks to a month when it starts getting cold,
it's not gonna.
Then they're not going to be flying to the resources, so they're going to have to rely on what you left them to make it.
I like the idea of that for me. Like, I don't think I got bees to harvest honey. I think I got bees because I wanted to be a part of the bee world and also how they make you feel.
Well, see, I never got bees to make money or sell honey or sell bees for that matter. I just want to learn. I don't like being retired, so I've had something to occupy my mind.
Yes.
So I want to learn the hive entity itself.
I like that.
All about that.
Yeah. So a little sidebar story is Pat retired twice from the same company. This is how much he does not want to be retired.
It happens. It comes to find out it's a little harder work than I thought it was going to be. But I
bees are retiring.
Bees, but I like working the bees, and I like teaching other people about.
Yeah, bees. You're very good at teaching other people about bees, and
considering I don't like people. Well, okay.
You know what? I hear you on that one. It's like, but I wouldn't mind teaching people about bees. Well, I wanted to talk to you about something else that you do, and you are like a mentor for scholarship students at a local college here, and a mentor for an association here. So I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around bee scholarships. What is that? What is that all about?
It's basically both the clubs I'm in have a program. Both of them have a program where we want to introduce young people to bees. So we set up a scholarship for a certain amount of members, and usually it's anywhere from 2 to 6. 6 would be, and sometimes it's been as much as 10 young people to teach them, and the club will furnish them with bees and a bee suit.
I love this.
And the scholarship student's job is just to go to classes and learn the bees, and then get bees, and then make them. We mentor them all the way through the first year, and then after that,
they're on their own.
Well, they can always.
What is the value of? I mean, I love the idea of teaching students about bees because I think the way a beehive functions, which I want to talk to you about later, is just like not short of miraculous. Like how well oiled it is.
Very different.
Yeah.
Until you start digging into it, you don't understand how complicated it is.
Exactly. So I want to talk about that. But like, are these students that are in agriculture, or they just love bees, or what brings a student to decide to want to be have an apiary?
Well, 4-H clubs bring them in. Schools that are teaching that kind of thing advise them to apply. I mean, and word of mouth from their friends did it this year, and their younger brother wants to do it next year. It's just there's no limit to how it gets out there.
Have you noticed that there's been a lot of corporate or entities keeping bees on roofs, and more like a big push towards like sustainability in terms of we keep bees? I know the Hilton has a hive of bees, not here in Dallas, but
there's a few places that do that, and I've talked to some people that do it. And
what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never been involved with it, but I know of some hotels that are doing it. The last one I saw was some kind of production plant around New Jersey somewhere, and they put like 6 hives on their plant, but they're doing it as a public relations thing. I mean, it's just as good. It's good for the bees. And
it's good for everybody, right?
It's good for their neighborhood. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with it.
And that's something you talked about to me, and that's something I really love about this, is that it's very local. You think about it's so hard to control the environment. It's hard to control what's going on in the world. And if you put bees, I remember you telling me this, you put bees on your land, like next year, your garden, your neighbor's garden, these trees are going to be like prolific.
And I have an anecdotal story about that. Okay. In my neighborhood, the first 10 years that I lived there, you very seldom saw in the groomed neighborhoods, any flowers, weeds growing up. dandelions.
Dandelions, yeah.
You very soft, but the second and third year that I had bees in my backyard, every one of my neighbors' yards now have dandelions. In the springtime, and if they want to get rid of them, they got to poison the dandelions. But in my neighborhood, there are dandelions. Kazoo.
Dandelions, people give them a bad rap. Okay, maybe if you have perfect grass, but first of all, dandelion root makes dandelion leaves make dandelion tea. Like also, they're a little sweet. Dandelions smell sweet, and bees love it.
Bees love them. That's one of the elm trees and dandelions are probably the two early spring.
That's another thing.
Nectar flows.
Trees. Thank you for bringing that up. I hope you guys heard that. Trees, elm trees make nectar. People don't understand that.
And for that matter, well, there's another one that does it, but elm trees, maple trees, all of those sweet, sugary trees.
Yes, maple, of course.
Of course, if you were in the Northeast around those maple trees, you probably set some bees on there just to keep them producing.
That's so true. Yeah, I don't think people think. We were talking earlier about like some myths that people have about bees. Because even for me, who loved bees, I didn't think trees were a part of like why there's no blossoms on them. But there are blossoms on those trees.
You just don't see them.
You just don't see them, right?
It's like the flowers are blending in, but in my front yard, the two elm trees that I have there, in the very good first warm spring days when the elm tree is blooming before it sets on you can actually stand under the trees and you'll think you're inside a hive.
Really? That noisy.
The bees are in there that thick.
So this is something that I think is so interesting about bees. And again, something you had said to me, just listening to bees, hearing the buzzing of the bees is so relaxing.
Well, there's a study out that I think
we talked about the study, I think.
A flat C or there's a sound in there that's very comforting. They claim it helps people with PTSD.
Yes, I remember you mentioning that. Yes,
I read an article on it. Now that there again.
No, I believe that there are mostly scientific studies, but there was another article that came out that said people who keep bees, beekeepers, live longer lives. And you begin to think
there's a multitude of articles out there about that.
And why do you think that is?
I got no clue. That's just like they say, if you eat local honey, your allergies are less.
Oh, yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah.
Is that scientifically proven? Bet $100 it ain't.
No, but it sounds good.
Yeah.
One of the things you also told me when I was having my first hive breakdown was that I had to start to think like a bee. Mm-hmm. And I want to talk a little bit about that because I was stressing out over having sugar water that had mold in it in my big gallon containers. And do you think that some of the things that when people start keeping bees, what are their biggest mistakes? Like they're afraid of the bees. They don't want to touch the bees. The
biggest mistake most people make is trying to treat that bee
like a pet dog.
Like they would a pet dog. Yeah. That's exactly right. Because they want to control the hive temperature. They want to control the moisture in the hive. And you don't think like a bee, so you may prop the roof open and let more circulation in there, and the bees don't want it.
Yeah, that's so true because the hive regulates itself. Like I also didn't know this.
The hive is very smart because it wants to survive.
Yeah,
and it survives because they all vote on everything. The bees have a democracy. They have a way of voting. They have a way of communicating. I mean, but most people, when they jump in and get a hive, they want it to do what they want.
Yeah.
And part of what we do teaching people is quit trying to make that a person. Quit trying to make it a cow.
Yeah.
It's a bee. It has a certain life cycle. It lives so long. And as an entity, they can decide to put a new queen in there. I mean, they can vote and do different things.
That's one of the things that you talked about. Like I had no idea that they vote, they decide. We don't like this queen anymore. And this is really interesting to everybody listening. If the hive decides it doesn't think the queen is producing enough, it will make a new queen. It will kill the old queen.
It'll either force her out or they'll kill it. I mean, they literally will kill it. And then out of the eggs that she leaves behind that are between 1 and 3 days old, they will produce
a new queen.
A new queen, virgin queen. Mm-hmm. And they might produce anywhere from 1 to 10 to 20 virgin ones in a hive. And when the first virgin queen hatches from her shell.
Yeah. What would they do with the other ones?
She will walk around
and sting them
and sting through their cell and kill them.
Oh, that's right. The queen cups.
Mm-hmm.
So
queen cups and queen cells.
Queen cups and queen cells. And that's one of the things I think is so fascinating when you open a hive that you learn that you were showing me mm-hmm. is like the cells are where the larvae are laid. Mm-hmm. And then the nurse bees have a job. Their job is to feed those. But everybody in the hive eats something different.
Yes. From an egg through the pupa, through the stages, the worker bees feed those eggs and pupa different versions of royal jelly and make them either bigger, make them back into worker bees or virgin queens. Now the drones.
What do they eat? What do the drones eat?
Well, the drones eat everything that everybody else does, but since the drones. Well, the strange thing about a drone, this is my
a drone walks into a bar.
Yeah, yes. The strangest thing and the hardest thing for me to explain to people is a drone has no father.
Wait, what?
A drone has no father. Okay. A drone
it's definitely a female-run world.
Right.
Okay.
But the queen can choose whether to lay a fertilized egg or an unfertilized egg. And if she lays
how does she have that? Is that just a genetic? How is that?
That's God made that decision.
I guess so.
But if she lays an unfertilized egg, it will be a drone.
Okay,
now,
so
a drone has a grandfather, but it doesn't have a father.
You're right. This is a great test. The questions be on like an SAT, mm-hmm. right? So she. Somehow inside of her, the queen that is made,
mated queen,
will then what percentage of the eggs are unfertilized versus fertilized? Like, how is that decided?
Through most of the year, of course, obviously, most of them are fertilized and turned into worker bees.
Right, because you need that many people.
The worker bees will make so many larger cells, and she will more than likely lay the drone egg in of the larger cell.
Right, because the each cell is a different size depending on because worker bees are smaller mm-hmm. and the drones have big butts, so they're bigger cells. And the queen has a really big butt.
The biggest thing on a drone is its eyes.
Really?
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
So they can look for the queen when she flies around outside
exactly
the hive.
Right.
Ding, 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 ding.
Right. See, you paid attention.
I did pay attention in class.
The drone has big eyes because the only thing that they exist for is to find a queen and mate with her.
Their only role is to do that. Now, if there's too many drones in the hive, what happens to the drones?
They'll push them out.
Oh, so the worker ladies, mm-hmm. they'll be like, too many guys in the house.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And they will actually open those cells and pull the pupa out and throw them on the ground.
What?
Yep.
Into the hive, and then the mortuary bees will carry those
mm-hmm.
out.
Yep.
Can you talk to us a little bit about how clean the inside of a hive is and how airtight it is? Because when I was freaking out, you told me, and I quote, this is a Pat McKannan quote, Jennifer, if a bunch of bees are in a tree, do you think they care where that sugar's coming from? If it's got a little bit of mold on it from nature? And I was like, no, sir.
Well, I mean,
you had to put it in perspective.
There are people, and I know hundreds of beekeepers worry about mold growing in the sugar.
Yeah, I did.
And you don't want a whole lot of it.
Yeah.
Because you really don't know what it's going to do.
Yeah.
But if you think about a feral bee and where it lives.
A feral bee.
It lives in a tree.
Yeah.
And do you think anybody went in there with a broom and a mop and cleaned that out?
No.
So a little bit of mold is not that exciting to a bee.
Yeah. You told me that and I was like, I felt so... you're like, of course, duh, like they're out in nature.
You don't stop. You see,
you made it.
You got to think like a bee.
Yeah, you got to think like a bee.
And bees are, nowadays people take bees out of water meters. They take bees out of the eaves of their houses.
I wish they wouldn't.
All of those places are not bleach clean when they move in.
This is true. And on the street behind me, there's another woman, and her next door neighbor has bees. And all of her bees, little funny story, mm-hmm. she got a new water fountain in front mm-hmm. of her house. And I said, I walked by your house the other day. It's full of bees. She goes, oh, those are my neighbor's bees. And I said, oh, they might be Kyle's bees, mm-hmm. who you met, who lives behind. She goes, no, I think they're my neighbors because she keeps bees, but in her old hollowed out tree. So she lets these bees live in this hollowed out tree in her yard because she says that's how they're supposed to live. Before Mr. Langenstrop decided to cage the bee. Yeah. I mean, this could be a little controversial, but it is kind of sad and a little upsetting when you actually go and read about like at what all bees sort of even beekeepers would be like that. And then this guy decided to cage a bee. And that's when the problem started with disease.
Well, but you got to look at the history of bees and beekeeping.
True.
They have found in Israel 8,000-year-old hives.
Yes, and
so it's not unusual for a human being to cage a bee.
Good point. Good point.
Human people.
We've been caging stuff for a long time.
Human beings have been raising livestock, which in Texas bees are livestock.
Yeah. Yes, they are considered livestock.
So you can go back a long. Now, who the first person was that put a bee in a mud straw box? Who knows?
Yeah.
And back in those days, there was no movable hives.
Yeah.
The frames were not. You couldn't take them out, clean them, and put it back in. When they robbed the hive, they just destroyed the hive.
Oh, really?
And squeezed all the honey out of the comb.
Because I haven't got to the point in my bee career where I'm going to have to clean those frames, and but I listened to this woman telling the story, and I really kind of admired it in a way because I felt like she's still keeping bees, right? She's still keeping the neighborhood full of bees. Right. And then when I knew that, I went by and found the tree, and they were beautiful. It was beautiful. Yeah. Like just to see a bee in the wild.
And if they're not bothering her neighbors, and they're not bothering
her neighbors are happy. They want bees. And
unless you have a reason to get rid of them, I wouldn't recommend leaving them in the eave of your house.
Yeah, of course.
Underneath your garage floor.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later somebody's going to get stung.
And there's bee rescuers that can come and move them someplace else.
The removal people, just tons of them exist.
Yeah. And what other thing you mentioned to me was like how your garden changes over time. And I got my bees in the spring, and I have a year-round perennial garden. And from then to now, from last year, I already can see a massive difference. And I have fall pollen from my bees. So it's raining right now. And I used to get worried before you told me, hey, stop thinking like a bee. Because these bees are inside their hive. They're warm and toasty. They're airtight. They know not to come outside. I don't need to worry about them.
What do you think happens to a bee that flew out this morning at 6 o'clock?
And got stuck in the rain?
What do you think it did?
Well, I did worry about that for a while. I guess it just hides under a leaf till it's over.
That's exactly what they did. They have enough sense to land on a tree, a bush, and just crawl on the underneath side of a leaf and wait for it to clear.
Well, I don't think humans think about these things sometimes. Like we don't think like, where do the birds go when it's pouring down rain?
All of your bees. Were you here during the eclipse?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
Did you go?
I did.
Were you watching your hive?
I was watching.
Were you shocked?
I was shocked.
Yeah. Because what happened was as soon as it started, now we did not have a full eclipse. It just dimmed. Here.
Yeah. It was dim. It was very dim, and I had forgotten it was an eclipse. And I was like, "Oh, the light's really weird. Oh my God, there's an eclipse!" And I ran outside.
Yeah. And all of the worker bees, the forager bees, were coming back because they thought
it was nighttime.
For some reason, the sunlight changed enough, and they triggered them to thinking it was going to be nighttime.
I thought, just by the way, for that eclipse, I thought it was getting nighttime. I thought because I've just had knee surgery that I'd slept all day. Yeah, and it was only like 12.
Really twilight.
Yeah, it was very twilighty.
Just for a while.
But they did all come back. And the other thing I noticed is that there was a bunch of them, guard bees maybe, I don't know, that were sitting on the front porch.
Yeah, they don't want to go inside.
They were very still.
Yeah, because if they all come back during the day, in the heat of the day, they could overheat the inside of the hive. So some of them stay outside so the hive doesn't get
Let's
hot.
talk a little bit about that because I absolutely love the way Pat describes like the hive. The hive is a box. It has a little ramp on it, which is the runway where the bees come and go. And there are guard bees that sit out front. There are the forager bees that leave. Like there's a lot of activity on that front porch. Like until you actually sit and watch it, like were you just fixated by their movements throughout the day?
My wife gets so mad because I've been known to just take a chair and just sit out in the yard and watch them.
I did that last week.
From the time a bee is born to the time it dies 45 days later or something, it may have as many as 15 to 20 jobs.
It's such a short lifespan. So what are some of the jobs it could have?
The first thing it does when it comes out of its cell, it immediately cleans that cell.
So it's born into a cell and then it cleans its own cell. That's one job.
So the queen can come back and lay an egg in it.
So tidy.
Yeah. Another worker, they clean it. And if it's not clean enough, she will refuse it and not lay an egg in it.
Really?
But then after 1 to 3 days, they become nurse bees and they start feeding
the other bees that are in the
royal jelly into the eggs that haven't turned into a pupa yet.
Interesting.
So, and then it progresses through, and about, I want to say around 11 to 12, maybe 14 days, they can turn into the guard bee.
Okay.
That's on the front
it's on the front porch, yeah.
But you got to realize that a worker bee is in that cell for 21 days. And after 21 days, it has so many days of different jobs and everything. And then about the 21st day after it's out, well, maybe not even then, maybe 17, 18, 19, then it turns into a forager. And that's what, being a forager is what shortens the life of a bee.
Because they're flying 3 and 4 miles looking for food, packing their legs with pollen.
They're doing it 100 times a day.
Yeah, it's crazy, by the way, to look at the takeoff. You can see bees flying out of the hive, coming up into the air, going whatever way, and then I lose them in the light. And then you see at the same time, you see other bees lining up in front of the runway.
Coming in.
You guys, it's just like a runway, lining up. And as they come straight down into the hive, you can see yellow or orange or red.
Pollen
They're
basket.
packing pollen. And it's like it's like flights leaving and flights going.
And what you
Pollen
also got to
basket.
understand, when you think like a bee, the first 21 days of its life in the cell, doing all those other jobs, at the 21st day, give or take a little bit, it has never been out of that hive.
So it's been in the dark this whole time, 21 days.
And it does not know where that hive is at.
Wait. It hasn't been out of the hive. It doesn't even know where its hive is, let alone Texas and the Lone Star State. Right. So how does it know if it forages to come back to its hive when they all look the same?
Let's just say the 21st day.
Okay.
At some time, usually in the afternoon.
Okay.
In my apiary, it's usually anywhere from 3 in the afternoon to 7.
That's me, around 3 or 4.
Yeah. Then those bees, those workers that were born, that were laid 21 days ago, they've never been out of the hive on the 22nd. Let's just say the 22nd.
Okay, we'll go to 22nd day.
They come out in the evening and they fly up in the air and they turn their back to the world and they face their hive. And they fly figure eights.
Yeah, I can see those eights.
Figure eights, and they'll go up high and they'll come down low, and they orient themselves to the front of that hive in its color and its shape. And what they're also doing at that same time, they're setting their GPS. Everybody calls it setting their GPS.
I like that.
But what they're orientating is through the ultraviolet, the polarized ultraviolet light. They're orientating the time of day and the sun. With the sun and the sunlight coming through the clouds, but they're using the ultraviolet, they're using the magnetic fields.
Any smell in there?
And well, the other part of it coming back is they leave trails in the air.
What?
They leave pheromones in the air, and they follow their own.
So it's like a little flight path.
Yeah,
that's
between
remarkable.
At the 21 days, they orient themselves. It's called an orientation flight. They face the hive. They fly around for anywhere from.
It's beautiful.
10 to 15 minutes.
Yeah, it's a long time.
It's a long time. But when you watch them, and it's a whole...
It's so many of them.
Well, you figure a queen lays 1,200 to 2,000 eggs a day, depending on how good she is.
I'm going to get my bee math card out.
So if at 21 days, you've got 1,200 bees that have never been outside that hive. So
1,200 bees that have never been outside, right?
So sometime in that afternoon, 1,200 of them have to orient.
Well, that's what 2 days ago or 3 days ago, it was beautiful. The sun was at that 3 or 4 o'clock, and it was just shooting. And then you could see before the sun caught them, like all this movement. And then at the same time, there were bees trying to land in there.
The actual foragers are coming
back. And it's so amazing to me because there's for everybody, there's like a little porch, and there's a tiny, maybe like a 4 or 5 inch gap in the front porch. Yeah. And it's not even a pause in the sky. They just like hightail it in there. And that just blew my mind.
And if a forager comes back and by mistake drifts into another hive, if the forager has pollen or nectar, the hive will let them in. Okay,
so if you're comparing gifts, let's not beware of Greeks bearing gifts. In this case,
but if you have something to contribute, they'll let you in.
So once you come into the hive, does that become your hive then?
That I don't really know.
Okay, it would be interesting, right?
I'd like to hear somebody say,
how would you know, right?
I don't know. But if you come in empty-handed, the guard bees will push you off there and not let you in.
Okay, so if this is Forager Bee goes out and he gets off track, he misses his hive, say at Kyle's house down the street, and he's like, oh, this kind of looks like my hive, and he's got nothing. Those guard bees will be like,
well,
I've seen them fight. I've seen them fight.
Think about most of these commercial apiaries. They'll have 100 hives sitting side by side.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So the drift is.
Well, how did that? I don't understand how that's managed at all.
Well, it
stresses me out a little.
manageable.
Yeah, it isn't manageable. One of the things I've noticed is I've been writing a lot of pieces for Forbes about bees and technology and how it can make a commercial beekeeper be a better bee farmer. And I talked to some of those farmers and they're like, we're just using it the old-fashioned way. And it really is one of the last agriculture aspects to be modernized in terms of digital beekeeping.
Right.
And it's interesting because there's a lot of companies that I've talked to. They're like, yeah, we have these sensors we put on the hives. It tells you like temperature, how many frames. These frames have honey. These frames are light on honey. And I think it would be great as a beekeeper. I want it, but they won't give it to me because I'm an urban beekeeper. And
there's no benefit to you.
And one of the things I said was, you don't believe the number of requests we get from urban beekeepers. And he said, I really wish that commercial beekeepers would ask for it because we get more requests from urban beekeepers.
Yeah, because we're interested in playing.
Yeah. And I said, I would pay.
Charge
me more.
There's a guy in the Collin County, well, he's in both clubs, to be honest, and he weighs his hives, and every box of his hive practically, if not every day, every other day.
So he can tell if there's more honey or less honey.
He can tell you from, we went through that drought.
Yeah.
And he called me about 3 days after the first rain, and he said, my bees put on 40 pounds that day.
After it rained?
Mm-hmm. And that's nectar and water and more bees and stuff. But you can actually tell if you want to spend the time and energy to weigh your hives.
That's so interesting.
But he has a friend that's developed this Wi-Fi device. It's got a scale, and they just put it under his friend's hive, and
I like this.
It transmits the weight of the hive on a minute.
Is he the commercial beekeeper?
No, he's not.
He's an urban beekeeper.
These are all amateur.
I mean, part of me feels like the amateur beekeepers might save the day in the end.
Well, they're obviously going to help by diversifying the number and location of bees.
Yeah.
But you can't fault the commercial guy because one of the things that the commercial beekeeper does for you is give you an almond.
Let's talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Another myth, people don't understand how important bees are. You can read a million articles about it, but let's come down to the one thing we do every day, and that's eat.
And if you eat almonds, for sure, I can guarantee you that one, or any fruit, oranges, apples,
it was pollinated.
Lemons, it was pollinated by a pollinator, not necessarily a bee.
No, there's lots of pollinators out there.
There's over...
Even a yellow jacket's a pollinator.
Yeah, absolutely.
People forget that.
Much as we don't
like much as we hate those, right?
But they are. So somebody has to pollinate. And just luckily enough, there's the Apis mellifera has been cultivated long enough that we can actually move them around and move them to...
Yeah.
You can move them to
North Dakota or California like Christy does.
Like Christy does.
I think it comes back to something you had said earlier was like, think like a bee. So I think part of me, of course, when I read about the commercial beekeeping and the fact that a bee only produces a teaspoon or something of honey its entire life. And then you've brought me, by the way, a gorgeous one of your honeys.
Yeah, about a pound.
Pat's Renaissance honey. And it's a little bee that has a lance on it because his wife's church group calls him the Renaissance man. Yeah. Can't wait to taste it. I feel guilty now eating honey to think of like how many,
there's a lady,
a teaspoon.
There's a lady, you probably might meet her at the meeting from time to time, Kaylee. We went over and we harvested her very first harvest from her hive this last spring.
Oh, how fun.
And she got like, I don't know, maybe 12, 14, 15 pounds.
Yeah.
And after we...
Seems like a lot.
After we took that out and spun it out and it was in her 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah.
She went to sleep. She went to bed that night and couldn't go to sleep because she felt guilty about robbing
the bees. I love that. I love that. And I feel the same way. I get it.
But you got to remember, bees, the way they are the original hoarders. they make these TV show hoarders look mild because there's a hive needs anywhere from 30 to 40 pounds to survive coming through the wintertime here in Texas.
Yeah.
And a hive can produce 100, 150 pounds of honey. So obviously they're hoarders. They overproduce. If you give them a place to put it,
they'll put it.
They'll put it.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Tiny Little Victories. If you hear me laughing, it's because my guest Kyle Tindle is in the studio today making me laugh. So welcome, Kyle.
Thanks. Glad to be back. In the background, we have Jennifer's cats running around causing an absolute ruckus.
Exactly.
She has a new kitten.
Exactly. They're making us laugh. All we see is like little blurs of color running behind us, and we're trying to be serious about bees. It's very difficult. So this is part 2 of Apis mellifera, which we're talking about honeybees. And Kyle is an urban beekeeper, and you may recognize him from the very first episode of season 2 for the New Year's episode. And by the way, you and Will's podcast is still in the top 10.
Oh my gosh.
I know.
Well, it must have been the champagne.
It must have been the champagne. No, you were very funny, but it's still, people still love that show.
Good.
Isn't that crazy?
Well, I'm glad.
I know, me too.
I'm glad to be back.
I know, I'm glad you're back. You're very good. You have a very good voice. But the reason I wanted to have him come back today is because Kyle is keeping bees, urban beekeeper. And you have been keeping bees as long as I have been keeping bees.
Yeah.
So what motivated you to keep bees?
You know, it's something that I've always wanted to do. I'm going to be a beekeeper in retirement. And then I remember one day, I think I was at market, and you text me and you were like, hey, I'm going to this.
I'm going to get some bees.
I'm going to this beekeeping class.
Yeah.
Would you be interested? Yeah. And I was like,
I remember that.
Yeah, actually I would be.
Isn't that crazy how you think something in your head, like you think, oh yeah, you know what, I want to be a beekeeper, but then you don't really know the steps that you would need to take to be a beekeeper. And then randomly someone says, hey, do you want to go to a beekeeping class? Because my grandfather had bees, and my sister and I used to like help keep the bees, but I don't remember anything other than the sound of them. And then had stumbled around on the internet, and you were like, yeah, sure, let's take a class. And we'll just I remember you saying, we'll just take a class and we'll get bees later. Yeah.
Because I wasn't quite certain about, getting the whole bee suit.
Yeah.
But we took the class and
it's a good class.
Bought the bees. So
like you guys did it really fast. You took the class and then we're like, yeah, we're getting bees.
We got them immediately.
And you bought a box. Like it was literally like a one day like shopping spree of bees, boxes, and classes.
That's the way to do it.
Bees, boxes, and classes. And so now you've been doing it for almost 7, 8 months, right?
Yeah.
What's your routine like with your bees?
It really depends on the weather.
That was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
That you should only rip the roof off of their home during certain times of the day.
During certain times of the day when they're not going to all attack you and sting you through your bee suit.
Exactly.
Because they're super mad. Also, in Texas, we had a really rough summer. It was 106 degrees
maybe even
for
more.
Like 2 months straight, maybe even more. It was feeling like Phoenix outside.
It was.
So yeah, it's really dependent on the weather, time of day.
But so you're going in the morning, I imagine.
In the morning, yes.
Were you going out a lot? Like when you first started, you mentioned I don't want to be stung by a bee, but you literally hopped right out there. I remember because I was like all gung-ho, and then I had a meltdown with my bees, and then you're just like hopping out there with no bee suit on. Yeah. Like you just had a bee jacket.
I had a bee jacket. It's just calming.
Yeah.
I feel like
agree.
There's this sense about the bees, you can kind of read them.
Yeah.
If it's okay to go in, and I'll be honest, I watched so many YouTube videos. I felt like a pro before I
Texas Bee Supply. Thank you, Texas Bee Supply.
Thank you, Texas Bee Supply. Yes, those guys are great.
You felt like a pro. That's really interesting because I felt like you had more confidence and were more calm and more just go in and do it type thing. But you did not have a suit. You're still working with a jacket, right?
Yeah. I mean, I still work with a jacket, maybe not the full suit.
You don't have a full suit.
I do.
Oh, you do?
But sometimes I just wear the jacket.
So bold.
It's easier.
Yeah, it is. Than getting
cooler.
Yeah.
In the Texas heat.
Yeah. Okay, so I love what you just said there because our guest who you also know, Pat McKannan, who was on here earlier, he talks about understanding bees and think like a bee. And he kept saying to you and I at a bee meeting, you just have to get to know your girls.
Get to know the girls. Yeah. And, Pat gives great advice because he's kind of like that grandfather of the beekeeping world for all of us new beekeepers. He just takes you in and is so great, gives great advice.
And he loves it.
But he's kind of like, bees are going to do what bees are going to do. It's nature. And they're either going to fly away or,
He says, think like a bee. Like, do you think a bee cares that there's mold in your sugar water? Like if they're in a tree living out in the wild, they're not going to be, oh, jeepers, it's cold in here. Like, because they're going to seal that beehive right up.
Worried about, oh my gosh, it's November. Should we put our entrance reducer on?
Totally.
Are the bees too cold?
Yeah.
Or are they too hot?
And actually,
what are we doing?
I'm going to tattle on you because this summer you were like, you should put a second roof on to give him more air.
I know.
But I did though. Excuse me. Kyle was very concerned this summer because it was very hot and we are both new beekeepers. So I have to admit that I probably was not thinking like a bee. I was thinking more of them like, oh, I smushed one when I put the lid on.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And the stress of smushing a bee. But now I don't feel so.
Well, they die every day. I mean,
so
you lose like 1,000 a day. You don't see them because they're dying out while foraging. But
you sound like Pat now.
Yeah. You lose 1,000 bees a day.
Yeah.
So I feel like the more I researched it, and the more I talked to Pat and the rest of our beekeeping community. Thank you, Trinity Valley Beekeepers Association.
Thank you, guys are great.
A great group that really has been an asset to us new
100%. They're so comforting. Like they just take you in, and they don't even. When we were there at that meeting, I think it was at like a Elks Lodge or something.
It was at an Elks Lodge. We had cocktails.
Yeah, but these guys are serious about their bees. And this
they are.
Maybe that one big guy would come around. He's like, "So, are you guys beekeepers? And do you have your Apivar treatment in?" And we're like, "Ah."
And I was like, "What's Apivar?"
Yeah, exactly. Should we have Apivar treatment?
Should I? So that's a whole other learning curve. Is learning the treatments and what to look out for in the bees. I'll call it bee body language.
Body. Listen to you.
At them flying. And are they falling into the grass before they get to their landing pad? Are they struggling to get to the hive? When you open it, are they slow? Are they being crazy? What's going on?
Are they being crazy? What's going on? Okay, so you have really come along. Like, I'm loving this. So what are you observing about your girls at different times of the day that you didn't see before because you weren't thinking like a bee?
Well, in the morning, they're definitely slower. It's cooler, they're calmer. That's the best time of day to go
I feel like they're getting ready to go out foraging.
And you'll see them get busier as the sun gets higher.
Yeah.
Their little entrance gets busy. It's like
they'll run away.
It's like DFW Airport.
Yes. Which surprised me.
Yeah, it is surprising. And when I first started, I didn't even realize the entrance reducer existed. I was like, oh, I just thought this was part of the hive. Yeah. And then I took it out and I was like, okay, this makes sense.
Right, because when we got our bees, because Kyle and I had new bees, which they call nukes.
Nucleus hives.
Yeah. You get a little box and it's full of bees. You drive in your car. With bees.
By the way, Will got stung by a bee as we were driving because one got loose. And
those little guys.
Listened to beekeeper about rolling the windows down.
Okay, yeah.
So that was exciting.
Yeah, that's fun. And Will's like, I hate bees. Yeah, so there's a little nuke, and then you put them, you take them, you get home, and then you don't open it until a certain time of day. Or the next morning. But that really stressed me out that they were in this little box and they just ridden in this car the whole way.
Yeah, so I opened it up, ripped the duct tape off, and I was like,
bees, of course you did.
4 frames in, get in your box.
And did they just like flood out of there?
It was the most amazing.
Right?
It was kind of magical. It was like a movie.
I think that's the best way to describe it because it is magical.
It's like a cartoon. Like the bees literally just...
I wanted to play Flight of the Bumblebees when it happened because it was just, they almost looked like a trail of black smoke.
It was a trail of black
coming
smoke.
out. And they knew where to go.
Yeah. They knew where their queen was.
How? Because the queen. That's right.
It's all about the queen bee.
And so when you let them out and they came out, did they fly or did they go straight into the hive or did they, because you just then you had to take a frame and put them in. So are those bees that came out first, were those the guard bees? Were those like the ones that are like, bah!
I think so.
Because
those would have been the guard bees. And then...
So they have the guard bees, the forager bees, the nurse bees wouldn't have flown out. They would have been the ones still sitting in the frames, right?
Yeah.
The drones
do nothing.
just except mate one time a year.
Mate one time, die, and that's it.
That's their job. That's your job.
Yeah.
And then you put the frame in. And then I always wondered what's happening to all those other girls that were out there zooming around. Like, did they have to reorient themselves to say, "Oh, this is our home," because we knew the queen was in there?
The pheromone that the queen bee puts
Isn't that amazing?
Draws the workers in, and that's how they know it's their hive.
And another time of the day, do you go out in the evening to watch them at that evening flight where they're
all coming home?
Yeah,
and
it's amazing.
Feet are just covered with pollen,
little fuzzy legs full of colors.
Yeah, all different shapes.
Did that amaze you? Because I couldn't believe it when I was watching it. Like, you could see them, like, you're right, DFW, you see how planes land. Yeah, exactly.
Of going back and forth, and they fly within just a few feet.
So tell me about what your favorite time of day is with your bees. Is it the morning? Is it the evening? Or is it just...
I think the
Do you have a favorite time? Okay.
It really varies.
Yeah.
And, growing up, my granddad, I think I was telling you the other day, he was a farmer. And so this is kind of my way of connecting.
I love that.
With that. It's an agricultural hobby.
Yeah.
So it's something that I can go out in the yard and get my hands dirty, so to speak, covered in honey.
But also, you're a gardener.
I'm a gardener,
you have created a beautiful paradise for your bees back there from just like in the past year. You created a huge, but it's beautiful. So both of these agricultural things kind of go hand in hand. And
it's therapeutic.
I think so.
So
I agree.
Midday I'll go out. Want to take a break from work when I'm working from home and go watch the bees just fly in and fly out.
Pat also talks about this, just sitting there on his bench and just listening to them. You can hear the hum of the hive.
It's calming.
It is calming, unlike the sound at the beginning of this podcast.
And at first it is intimidating, but then as it becomes more of a hobby, I think you just associate that with.
Do you think you've changed from May to where you are now? Like,
definitely. Oh my gosh, whenever I first got the nuke.
Yeah, the nuke. Now we say nuke. We don't have to say nucleus because we're so.
Well, whenever I first started, I was like, "What is a nuke?"
No, because they're just abbreviating stuff.
Why is it not a baby hive?
Yeah.
Or,
a baby hive. It's not a baby nursery hive.
I call it a nursery hive.
I didn't know what it was either. They don't tell you because
they just assume that you know.
Exactly.
And
they know we're babies. We're baby beekeepers.
Baby beekeepers. From where I started, it's definitely been a transition.
Yeah.
And there's been a lot of growth, but it's exciting. It's a hobby.
So do you have honey?
Yes.
Okay, you have honey. So describe your hive to us, what it looks like. You have one box.
So I have the base box.
Yeah. I think it's a base box.
What's it called again? The deep.
The deep. That's right, the deep.
It's a deep. Sorry, had a moment.
That's okay. You remembered it. I didn't.
The medium deep and then the small.
Yes. I'm forgetting.
Remember.
I think it's a shallow. So I'll help you. You have a deep box, and then you have a box that's not as deep.
Yeah. It's like a double deep.
Can we say that?
And then a super.
Okay, you have a honey super.
But I don't have it on now.
Okay.
Because
where's your honey?
It's in that second deep.
Okay. So let's explain the anatomy of a beehive then. So you have a deep, and then you have a box that's not so deep on top. And then when you want honey, you put on what they call a honey super, which is like a shallower box.
Exactly.
And then you put a piece of plastic between the box below that keeps the queen out, because you don't want the queen coming up and laying eggs in your honey.
Very controversial.
Really?
You'll speak to 30 different beekeepers and get 30 different answers, as you know.
This is what I've learned.
The queen excluder is a highly debated topic
in the
beekeeping world. Yes.
I did not know this.
And I prefer not to use it.
Okay, so you don't have one.
As Pat says, bees are going to do what bees are going to do. And I just don't want my bees excluded, or my queen bee.
I don't want any exclusion in your hive. I like it. I get it. She wants to go do it. She can do it.
She can do it.
Okay, so you have lots of frames, and then you have tons of honey in your second box.
Yeah.
So are you going to harvest your honey, or are you going to let the bees have it for the winter?
So they're going to have it for the winter, and then we'll look at harvesting in the spring.
Good. We could do that together.
After the honey flow, yes.
Now, Pat closed out his podcast talking about how bees were the ultimate hoarders, that if they can find a place to put honey, they will hoard it and put it away. So in looking at your top box, have they hoarded a ton of honey?
There is a ton of honey.
Oh my God. How much honey do you think is up there?
8 frames.
What?
There are 5 full frames of honey right now.
You probably have like a couple pounds of honey.
So they are ready for winter.
This is good.
Yeah. I'm excited.
Yeah.
I have a strong hive going into the end of this year. And so
that's the goal. That's the goal.
Yep. That's the goal in beekeeping. You have to have a strong hive going into the winter so that they can support and sustain through the winter and into spring.
Yeah.
And then we'll have our spring honey flow.
So you bring up a good point about a strong hive and a weak hive. And I didn't know this. And I think your hive is actually doing better than my hive. And so although Pat came over and looked at my hive for me, because I had knee surgery and couldn't go open it. And he said, "Your girls look great." I said, "Do I have any honey?" He goes, "I forgot to look at that, but I was just giving them more sugar." But he says they look happy. What happened was somebody introduced these mites, and so they're eating, like they eat the larva, they eat the wings off the bees, and then they come out and then they can't. So you're supposed to treat them. But one of the ways you treat them is you put this little container, you put like a handful of bees in, you can put powdered sugar, and they get kind of drunk off the sugar, and then whatever falls off of them, it's a mite, then you know. Or you can use alcohol, which kills the bees, which I have trouble doing. Yeah. So I decided just to treat anyway.
Right.
Without checking.
What most people do. Yeah. Unless if you're in the commercial.
Right. You would want to know.
There's a fine line between commercial beekeeping techniques and us urban beekeepers.
Yeah.
I mean, because obviously commercial beekeepers are more concerned with margin.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas urban beekeepers, we can have really expensive hives, like Jennifer and I do.
Yes, we do. With gorgeous hives.
Gorgeous.
Honey
covered in
hives.
Beeswax and monogrammed.
Yeah, monogrammed with a bee.
Yeah. Whereas the commercial beekeeper, they're more worried about their margins.
Yeah.
So
and not getting like mites and have disease.
So they test, whereas we can just treat regardless, which is probably smart.
Yeah. And also to your point, like we talked about this before, about there's all this technology that's come out where you could put sensors on the hives and you can see like how many frames, what's the temperature, the humidity. These guys are trying to sell this to these Christies of the world, right? Sorry, Christy. But these guys are like, hey, we're just doing it our way. But I'm like, okay, but us urban beekeepers want to know, and they will give us the tech because they're trying to digitize, as you pointed out, bees are in agriculture.
Yes.
And they can't get them to use it because it's so hard to produce honey, like to be a commercial beekeeper. Yeah. And you and I have been trying to get these sensors on our hives. Like I'm still begging this company to give us a sensor because as an urban beekeeper like you, I want to know what's going on in there. Like, how can I make it better? Do I need to put like a little rain cover over the top? And of course I said this to Pat and he said, do you think the bees care about the rain when they're living in a tree? I'm like, no, that's a good point.
Oh, Pat, he really has a way of reining us in.
He really does. And he makes you, I think he must think these kids are so high strung.
But also there's, you bring up, being able to see into the hive. There's this one hive that I looked in, the flow hive. I looked into purchasing that.
What's a flow hive?
It is very urban. So it has a little window. You can look into the beehive.
Yes, please.
Flap down a little piece of wood. It has a clear glass. But the thing with the flow hive is you just turn a key. It slides the frames, maybe a half inch to break into the hive, and the honey just flows
No.
Yeah. You'll have to look it up.
Yes. How much was the flow hive?
Oh my gosh, like $5.
Oh, well, and we paid almost, with all of our gear, it wasn't that far off.
Yeah, but that's just for the basic.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Pat was saying that he was at the state fair recently and the bee groups had a bee tent table and that they had an exhibition hive.
That's interesting.
That's what I said.
I would have loved to have seen
I would have loved to see it too. And I said, but also, excuse me, what is an exhibition hive? He said, it's all, you can see it. It's all clear.
Well, remember I sent you the link to the book, the beekeeping book, and it was, what was the name of it?
How to Keep Bees and Sell Honey.
But it's from like
right here.
The 20s?
Yes, I'm going to get up from my desk in my studio. We're going to make real sounds because we're real people having a real podcast. Yeah. How to Keep and Sell Honey. And it's black and white.
But it talks about state fairs and these exhibitions, and people would literally make bee beards.
Yes,
because bearding is a natural instinct of bees. when they get really hot. And so this guy has this beard of bees on his face. It's just a really interesting book that was written years ago.
And you know what? We'll put this in the notes because Kyle is absolutely right. First of all, the fact that you can still get it is fascinating to me. 1948.
1948. This book is ancient.
And he has a picture of his house. It's black and white. It has these beautiful white hives, and actually he has 30 colonies of hives producing over 7,000 pounds of honey.
Yeah.
And
but book, it gives great advice. It's very simple. It's an easy read.
It's a great book. You were right to do this. It's right on my bookshelf.
Yeah.
What else would you recommend to people? Like, that's great. We'll put this in the notes. I had forgotten about that. So is a guy standing here and he's made a beard of bees. Oh, and beneath him there's a woman with a beard of bees. I think another really great resource for people is Texas Bee Supply. These guys have free webinars and free monthly video web series of very basic things like how to open your hive, or how to put varroa mite strips in, or how to check for the queen bee, or how to check for queen cups.
Yeah, and
I was amazed at how many resources were out there.
Yeah, there are a lot of resources, but I think you really have to learn to navigate commercial beekeeping advice versus small backyard
you're right. I think you're right.
advice, because it can get expensive.
Yeah.
And there are just so many products on the market.
Yes.
So I think the best beekeeping advice I was given was just keep it simple.
That's really good. Was that Pat?
I think it was, probably. It sounds
Thanks,
like
Pat.
Pat would say.
Yeah, keep it simple. And I think that's a really good point, because when it was probably also Christy, because she's very practical.
Yeah.
Like, you don't need something fancy. Use this old outfit.
Yeah, we've been fortunate to have very practical advisors.
Yeah. Yeah, because she said, when I sent her a picture of my hive, she was, well, that's a fancy hive.
Yeah,
I'm like,
I remember that.
Yeah.
And then I was like, oh, well, I didn't need to buy this expensive.
I guess not. I mean, but it's very pretty. It looks very pretty in your
Thanks,
yard.
Jennifer. She gave me that recommendation. She was like, here, buy this one. This is the one I've got.
I like it, though, because it's coated with honey. It's sealed with honey.
It is really pretty.
Yeah, wax.
It's natural, and it's a natural wood grain.
Yeah.
So we don't have the traditional white.
No, but those are painted. Like, I think
those are painted,
yeah. So, I mean, that worried me about, like, toxic paint and things. And so I wanted to ask you this question. Winter's coming. We've both had pretty brutal winters here. We haven't had bees.
I'm a little worried.
Me too. What are you going to do? Are you going to
the good news,
set up an insulation tent around?
I was actually just reading an article about that, and it was talking about mold. Moisture gets trapped in the hive and in that insulation, and it can actually cause
that's not good.
The comb to mold. So I'm not going to do that. And plus, our winters here are very mild.
Yeah, but last winter was rough.
It was rough.
I thought about putting a rain tarp over the front for sleep. Okay, I know.
Totally
because
fine.
why?
Just
If they were in a log out in the woods, they would be getting rained on.
So I'm going to keep it simple.
Okay.
And
are you going to feed your bees through the winter, or what's your plan?
Am.
Okay.
Although they
got a lot of honey.
Slow lately to eat, so I think they're just getting pollen and nectar from natural sources.
And Kyle and I still have pollen to offer our bees because we have year-round gardens. And here in Texas, if you look around, you see a lot of native plants that have a lot of pollen still.
Yeah. And I have a lot of Indian blanket.
Yeah,
native
which they love.
Indian blanket, which is growing in the backyard, and they love it.
Yeah.
They're all over it right now.
Yeah. Because they're hoarding.
Yeah, and we're fortunate because we're urban beekeepers. We live in a neighborhood that has a lot of beautifully kept gardens.
And other beekeepers.
Yeah.
So we have at least 4 beekeepers on our street.
We do.
And then on the back side of your house, there is a woman who keeps bees a la natural in an empty tree trunk in her front yard.
I love that.
Next to Natalie's house.
I love that.
And she has bees that come over and drink out of Natalie's fountain. And I said, oh, those are probably Kyle's bees too. But I said, where are her bees? She was in that tree right there. So she's choosing to keep her hive naturally.
That's interesting.
Yes, it's behind your house. You should go check it out.
My only concern there is mold and toxins. Like if you wanted to harvest the honey, you would have to be really careful.
I mean, if you think about it, people have been, Pat pointed this out. I keep pointing to his chair, although he's not here. He pointed out that people have been keeping bees in some way or another for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And
that's amazing.
And pulling honey from them. Because I was thinking, oh, this guy Langstrup or whatever his name is that made this box, and he, made everything all for commercial beekeepers. He goes, yeah, but Jennifer, people have been keeping bees for a really long time.
Well, that's
naturally.
Well, whenever we started putting them in
those boxes,
hives, is when all of the diseases started.
So we cause this problem.
Unfortunately,
we cause all the problems.
We cause all the problems.
I mean, I would be happy if I had a swarm come and settle in an empty tree. Then I'd have 2 hives.
Yeah.
Here's something else I wanted to ask you. So I didn't know this, but after they're born, I guess they graduate through jobs, right? If you're a nurse bee, you eventually do that, and then you become a different bee, and you get to go you eventually graduate, and you get to go forage. And Pat told me that they never see the light of day for the first 21 days of their little short lives because they're nursing, they're cleaning, they're a mortuary bee, and then on their 21st birthday, basically, they leave the hive and they shoot out of the hive. They have to orient themselves to that hive, to your hive. So they fly up out and they make this crazy 8 pattern. They're using like the magnetic lines of the earth, the pheromones,
and the sun,
exactly, to orient themselves to know that this is my home. Just think, they've never left the dark. And then when they turn 21, they leave and then they go out to forage. And that's how they know to return back to their hive. Fascinating.
It's very fascinating. They're just super intelligent.
So
and I
intelligent.
never knew until I started keeping bees.
Yeah, me either.
Bees were such intelligent creatures.
I mean, how did we miss that?
I don't know. I think people just don't think about it. You go to the store, the honey's on the shelf. We don't have to really work for it.
Take it for granted.
You take it for granted, as we do so many things.
It's really sad because they don't make that much honey in their whole lifetime, just a teaspoon. And then now I look at honey and I get stressed out when I see it on a cooking show and they're just like rubbing honey over everything. I'm like, stop!
It's such a precious commodity.
Yes, and it's so hard to produce it. Like the amount of time and effort you have to put in to get to that point. It's just when I see it on the shelves now, I feel not happy.
Yeah, beekeeping. I agree. Beekeeping will definitely change your perspective of honey and the way that you use it. And I think that's why so much is imported. Now we're getting a lot of honey from China, and it's causing a lot of competition for our local beekeepers, which is not healthy.
No,
for them financially or us, because we're losing.
And also these bee farmers are not using the latest technology that could help them perhaps understand their hive better if you're facing this global competition.
Right.
And then I think about the Chinese beekeepers. I'm like, well, they're going through the same stuff. Like the amount, the work that it takes to harvest honey is backbreaking. Those pictures when Kirby was in North Dakota, we were watching these barrels, and the amount of work it takes is just mind blowing to me.
Manual.
Yes.
There's a lot of manual labor involved. I mean, just for us to go out back, I mean, it takes an hour and a half at least just to get suited up and go out there
and get the smoke ready.
One box.
Or
single box of bees.
Yeah. That I think, yeah.
And then you have to pull the frames out, the 8 frames.
I have not checked my frames in a while. That I need to go do that. And the weather's lovely here, so I'll probably be, if you want to check a box later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's another thing.
I'll come and check your box. You come help me check my box.
I mean, just learning how to smoke the bees.
So do you want to explain how that is?
Cool smoke. And you don't want to throw an amber on the queen bee or
no.
hive collapse,
That's so funny.
I was panicking because I was using straw in the beginning. Pine straw.
Because that's what Christy told us to use.
Well, that's what Christy had.
Oh.
Because I think she gets it from Louisiana.
Yeah.
But I was reading articles, I came across this one that was like, use cotton.
Yes, that's what I have. Cotton bird,
because
cotton.
It's a cooler burning material.
Okay, explain to everybody here about the smoke situation, because I feel like it's the trickiest part.
It's tricky.
Is getting that right.
Because you can't smoke them too much.
Yeah.
Or they'll want to leave, or they'll eat too much.
But you also have to get the smoke right. Because if you don't have enough smoke, when you open up that hive and they
you're
start...
going to get stung.
Oh, yeah.
And they will sting through your suit, and they're very mad.
Yeah.
I've
so
experienced that.
Explain that situation about getting the smoker and why it's important.
It's important because it calms the bees. So whenever you smoke your hive, it tricks them into thinking that there's a forest fire. So they dive into the comb and begin consuming
They're
honey.
basically gorging out.
They're gorging out to store energy to flee the forest.
Exactly.
To get away from the forest fire. And it's so cute. Whenever you smoke them, you see them dive in and just start eating.
Gobbling up honey.
Wiggling.
That's another thing about before we came in so naive in a way about body language of bees. And you just said something really beautiful, like waggling their butts. And you can see them when they're happy. They do waggle their butts.
They do.
And another trick that Pat taught us was to fill a little bottle with sugar water.
And
spritz them when you open the hive, because it kind of, they're like, oh, I got to clean myself up. There's sugar. Yeah. And it kind of distracts them to get your smoke on. They love that stuff. They love it.
They love sugar water as much as I love Aperol Spritz.
There you go. It's the same thing. You just like your bees. And you're feeding your bees internally right now.
Yes, they have an internal feeder, but they haven't been eating from it as much. I think, again, because we've had such great weather recently.
Yeah, it's been really great. Yeah.
We've had our second spring.
Yeah, we have.
Texas does.
And we're very lucky.
Yeah.
I'm anxious to get out there and open it because, like I said, I couldn't open it, but Pat opened it for me. And he said, looks really good in there. The girls look happy.
Well, I'll take Pat's advice. I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, I trust him if he says that. I trust him.
He's a trusted advisor.
Right?
And by the way, I've only seen my queen once. Well, and I was so obsessed with seeing the queen.
Really?
I know she's a young queen.
Really?
Yeah.
Christy gave you a good
Christy pointed her out to me whenever I took the box.
Okay.
But I know that she's still around because I see the capped brood.
Okay.
And so you know that she's around.
So she's still laying.
She's still laying.
All right. So Kyle has a very young queen, and apparently she's still laying. She's been laying since May.
Probably 1 or 2 frames.
Really?
Yeah. Which bee supply companies said
that's
it's
good.
Normal this time of year to have 1 or 2 frames.
Really?
Back in the summer, it was like 4 frames. She was really laying. I mean, I would see them hatch. They would be chewing their
now that is so cool. When you look down, you see like that
little babies hatching.
Little something moving. All of a sudden, a little bee chews its way out.
A bee is born.
I have never seen my queen, but I know she's in there.
She's in there.
Yeah, because
you still have worker bees.
I think my worker bee girls decided they would be prepared in case something happened, and they made queen cups. They made like extra ones, and then I asked Pat, and he said, "Oh yeah, sometimes they just build one
creatively
and then take it down again, just to make sure they can build it." And they would build it to practice. So if a queen is too old to lay, and if that young queen's like, I've had it with this box, I'm leaving.
It's the hierarchy of the hive. It's so interesting.
And she'll take a third of the hive with her and fly away to start a new hive.
A new colony.
And then this left behind will have to make a new queen. So sometimes they practice making these little queen cups where the queen would live until she hatches out. So how long until a queen hatches when she's in there, according to the bee math card?
Oh my gosh. 16 days.
16 days. So what about a worker? Once a worker is laid, how long is it till you have a new worker?
A new worker. Let's see. 3.5 days hatching, 9. This card is confusing.
Well,
Cat,
it's bee math.
Days plus minus 1, 20 days foraging, 42 plus. What is this?
So 21 days. That's what he was talking about. 21 days.
21 days.
Forage. Oh, yeah. Because they'll forage for 20 days and then 42 days plus 7. Oh, I don't know. Maybe this is confusing. If you see eggs, there was a queen 3.5 days ago, right? We're just going everybody just Google it.
Just Google
we will put this in the notes. So what kind of advice would you leave people? I want to know, would you recommend that people keep bees?
If you have the time.
Okay.
It's not
just take time.
Yeah, and I don't think it's something, if you have young kids, it's probably not something you want to get involved with. The hive is risky.
Yeah.
They do sting.
Yeah, they do sting, but they're not. It's not a hard sting.
It's not
a mild sting.
I've been stung 3 times at once. And I don't know how many times I've been stung in my head because I'm too lazy to put on the suit, or it's too hot, and I just go out and I'm like,
so you guys know, Kyle is just popping out there in like shorts and a t-shirt.
Yeah.
I am in a full on bee suit.
Jennifer's like the Martha Stewart of beekeeping. She's in her like name brand beekeeping suit. Has her French smoker and her cotton from whatever.
My organic cotton.
Yeah.
But I had a really hard time with smoke. You had an easier time. I had a hard time smoking. And then I got panicked because I ran out of smoke mid-open hive.
Yeah, and then they attacked you.
Oh man, they did. They attacked me, and I was running around like a crazy person. And then Pat came over, and he said, if this happens to you, this is a great piece of advice from Pat. If the bees are not leaving you alone in anywhere, say you're at a picnic and in the summertime, and you're drinking a can of Coca-Cola and you see bees on the Coke, please don't be mad at the bee, because the bee is starving to death. The bee is fucking hungry, and it's trying to get sugar.
It needs sugar.
So you guys, that's what a bee is doing, is trying to get sugar. But if they start chasing you, go into a dark place. I didn't understand this. And then when Pat was here and we were doing it, my cousin, who's like you, had her bathing suit on and a bee jacket. They stung Pat. So they got a little feisty because they can smell that alarm pheromone. Yeah. And so they kept circling around him, and then they were circling around us. He goes, you guys just go in that little dark room. We went into a shed, and then they just flew out to the light. Yeah. And so Pat talks about this. I said, why did they do that? He goes, PTSD probably, because you spent the first 21 days in the dark. You're like, exactly. Oh no, we're not going to be.
No, we're not going back to the dark.
Yeah. So I thought that was a good hack. Like if you're getting chased by a bee, don't flap your arms around, just walk into a dark place and they will immediately fly out to the light.
And also, whenever you get stung, do not mash the
This is a good advice. Yeah. Don't do it.
Skin, because it releases more venom. So you're supposed to take your fingernail and scratch it sideways.
And releases more of the alarm pheromone to the other bees that there's a bad person around.
Race to you.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good.
You're going to get more stings.
That's a good hack.
But I feel like they love stinging me on the top of the head.
Really?
For some reason.
Do you have your
because
hat?
Of hair.
Oh.
I think
they're like, a little hairy nest.
They're like, a little bear is trying to get in our hive, and they're attacking.
Are you wearing a bee hat?
Normally. But some days, if I'm just popping off the lid, filling the feeder, I don't do it.
Interesting how brazen you've become, because I used to do that.
Like an old-time beekeeper.
I know. You're like an old-timey beekeeper now. You're going to have to be in this book.
I know. I need to.
I think that we should do some beekeeping before the weather gets. I could use some help.
Yeah, well, let's go.
Okay, let's do it. So, anything you want to leave anybody else with? Because I love your passion for this. Like you both came in at the same time, but I think personally, you've really like just surpassed like amateur beekeeper you've really like listened to all the things, and you've learned so much. Now I'm looking to you for encouragement, you and Pat, because I kind of had a wobble there for a bit.
Yeah. Well,
I do talk to my bees though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's always fun to talk to the girls.
Yeah,
they
is,
all
right?
Have like 5,000 different names.
You name all your bees.
Oh, yeah.
Hello, Gertrude. Hello, Mary.
Well, there's Queen Bee, Beyonce.
Beyonce. Oh, I love that. I love that. Beyonce's the name of your queen bee. Now, how long will a queen bee last?
Oh my gosh, how long?
Like, how long can you keep your Beyonce? How long can you keep your Beyonce? I don't know, 3 or 4 years?
I think it's 3 or 4 years.
But what happens?
I need to brush up. You're asking some really good questions.
But what happens? Like, okay, so what happens to us if we lose in the winter? How will we know if we've lost our queen, if she's made it through?
Oh.
That's a good question, right?
Well, there won't be any larvae.
Right, so we can. If there's no larva, then what do we do?
There will be no activity.
But then, do we call Christy and say we need a new queen?
We need a new queen. But if we still have worker bees, they'll adapt to a new queen.
They'll make a new queen.
They can ship a new queen through the mail overnight.
Yeah.
Some of these beekeepers
But they could also make a new queen.
Yes, which is
they would choose to make a new queen.
About earlier with the queen cup.
Yeah. They would decide which one to make, and then they would only feed her royal jelly.
Royal jelly, yes.
And then she would become the queen.
And she would be...
She'd be Beyonce number 2.
Become Beyonce.
Yeah. I haven't named mine because I've never seen my queen. She's elusive. I know she's producing because I see
she's there.
I have honey, but not like you have, but I have a honey bridge because Pat was like, "Ooh, a honey bridge." And it's basically...
So that's where they've made honey
in a rainbow. Yeah.
And is there no comb?
There's no comb. It's just like a rainbow bridge of honey.
Okay.
My girls are cray-cray. Like, they don't do anything right.
What are they eating?
I don't know. They have a lot of pollen stores.
Well, that's good. Because that's protein.
Yeah.
So that's something else.
Yeah.
The beekeepers.
Bee bread.
Bee bread. Mm-hmm. So it's a different type of protein and sugar versus what they get from honey. And
that part...
It's very science heavy and more artistic. So.
Yeah. Kyle and I were at the same beekeeping meeting. They were talking about carbohydrates, which we both love, right? Yeah, but they were talking about bee.
We're talking about croissants.
Yeah, croissants, or is this like bee croissants? Bee pollen is like a carbohydrate, which is like bee bread. Yeah. And then immediately you and I were like, do we need to buy some of this? Where do we get this bee bread? Do we need to split it? Pat.
Commercial, it goes back to commercial versus residential beekeepers. So commercial beekeepers sometimes have to feed their hives.
Yeah.
If you're living in a nice neighborhood with year-round pollen supply.
Yeah.
And the way that you monitor it is you look at the entrance and see if they're carrying it in or out. So it's just very
simple. And also Pat says some commercial beekeepers will weigh their hives.
Yeah.
They'll weigh every single hive.
Right.
And he said, but what I usually do in the spring is I just like lift it up a little and see how heavy it feels. And then I'm able to say, like, by the time fall comes, ooh, this is heavy. I know there's lots of honey.
But we don't have anything to compare it to.
No.
So we have one hive.
We will next year.
That's our base level.
Yeah. Do you think you'll get another hive?
Debatable.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. I just want to get to a full honey super.
Yeah.
I want to get to one good season of a
full.
full.
And then we have to get a honey extractor.
Oh my God.
And spin the honey.
I know. I'm excited about that though.
I mean, fun. Oh, messy but fun.
Messy but fun. We should have honey extractor day.
Oh, that would be fun. We could have a party.
Yes, we should. We drink some mead to celebrate.
Yes.
And then a honey extractor.
Okay. Let's plan it.
All right, we're doing it. Okay, you guys, what we're going to do is we're going to put Kyle's book in the notes, How to Keep Bees and Sell Honey. Actually, it's just a really good book, I have to say. It was really good advice. We're going to put Texas Bee Supply because
they're a great resource.
They are a great resource.
And it took me a minute to find them, surprisingly, but they offer...
Once you find them, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere, and they offer such great advice for the Texas beekeeper. You'll find a lot, and this is very important, you'll find a lot of information out there online from beekeepers all over, but beekeeping is a regional
100%. Very good point,
You really have to connect with local beekeepers. That's the important
I love
beekeeping.
I love you said that.
Yeah.
Because Texas is a very prolific beekeeping state, and if you're in Missouri, please don't go to you have your own shit going on there, right?
Yeah, go talk to your Missouri.
Go talk to your Missouri people.
Like I had a friend in Ohio who was like, "Where did you get your bees? Can I have her number?" And I was like, well, it's gonna be different for you.
You're right. You could not have Christy's number.
Yeah, it's gonna be different for you first off, and just your practice is gonna be a little bit different. You guys get a little bit of snow.
I love that you said this. See what I mean? You're like a bee guru now. And on that note, thank you all for listening. And thank you, Kyle, for coming and sharing all your bee knowledge.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody. We're going to close up this podcast today by thanking you all for listening. We did a 2-part today because there's just so much to talk about with bees. I'd like to thank Patrick McKannan and Kyle Tindle for coming in and sharing their experiences with us. I'm going to put in the notes some links to 2 things. One, to the Trinity Valley Beekeeper Association here in Dallas, Texas, to Texas Bee Supply, which is a fountain of information if you're interested in learning to keep bees, and also this great book that Kyle loves, How to Keep Bees and Sell Honey. If you are interested in keeping bees, I think it's a great hobby to have. If you can't keep bees, but you want to help the bees, maybe just plant a nice pollinator garden. And on that note, we will see you in 2 weeks on Tiny Little Victories.